Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Frerin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. When Lix and his friends spotted a group of partially furless bipeds in their favorite tavern spot, they were initially wary. Before stirring up trouble, they researched the species, grinning when they discovered humans ranked only 9th in Galactic strength ranking. As they approached the small humans, however, they failed to notice they'd overlooked one crucial variable: the relation of size to strength. The concept never even flickered through Lix's mind as he towered over most of the tavern's patrons, his 9-foot frame casting long shadows across the candlelit establishment. Why would it? The Vizarians occupied the undisputed 4th place in the Galactic strength rankings, a position they'd held for 3 centuries since the Galactic Council first established the standardized testing protocols. Every muscle fiber in his leathery gray skin had been measured, catalogued, and compared against hundreds of other species. The results were clear. In pure strength, only 3 species in the known galaxy could match a Vizarian's raw physical power. Lix flexed his 4-fingered hands, each digit thick as a small tree branch, and felt the familiar surge of confidence that came with genetic superiority. His exposed chest, a broad expanse of tough black hide marked with the ritual scars of his coming-of-age trials, expanded as he drew in a deep breath, his large blue eyes focused and sharp. The action wasn't necessary. The tavern's atmosphere processors ensured optimal breathing conditions for most species, but the display served its purpose. Zix and Vorax, flanking him on either side, mirrored the gesture without prompting. Their chests swelled in synchronized intimidation, leather skin stretching taut over muscle groups that human anatomists would struggle to name. The humans had taken their table. Their table. The corner booth with the perfect view of both entrances, close enough to the bar for quick refills, but far enough to avoid the chaos when fights inevitably broke out. Every regular knew that spot belonged to them whenever they graced this particular establishment with their presence. These humans either didn't know, or worse, didn't care. Either way, the insult couldn't stand. Size mattered in interspecies spaces. It was an unwritten rule as old as first contact itself. Away from the civilized corridors of the Galactic Council stations, away from the mediated safety of diplomatic zones, the primitive parts of every species' brain still responded to basic visual cues. Big meant dangerous, tall meant dominant. The humans, barely reaching 7 feet at their tallest, clearly hadn't got that memo. Or perhaps they had, and their 9th place ranking had made them foolishly brave. Zix's massive hand suddenly pressed against Lix's chest, shoving him aside with enough force to make him stumble. The gesture sparked irritation that flared hot in Lix's secondary heart, a redundant organ that kicked in during combat or extreme emotion. His friend had always been impulsive, too eager to claim the spotlight in their little power plays. But arguing now would show weakness in front of the prey, so Lix held his tongue and watched as Zix took point in their approach. The largest Vizarian moved with deliberate slowness, each step coldly calculated to make the floor panels groan under his weight. He stopped mere inches from what appeared to be a human male, muscular by their species' standards and slightly larger than the others, matching what their hasty research had indicated about human sexual dimorphism. 3 of them occupied the booth, all presenting as males based on their facial hair and broader shoulder structures their data files had highlighted. Zix leaned forward, bending at an angle that brought his face level with the seated human. The movement was deliberate and deeply insulting in Vizarian culture. No adult bent to another's level unless mocking a child or challenging a subordinate. But the masterstroke was how Zix let his long silver hair, a source of pride among their people, grown since birth and never cut, cascade forward. The strands fell across the human's personal space, some even brushing against the aliens' peculiar fabric coverings.
Oh!
Zix's voice rumbled like distant thunder, each word dripping with false surprise.
It seems there are some tiny aliens in our favorite spot today.
Lix had moved to join the performance when Vorax burst past him, their smallest companion's shoulder checking him hard enough to bruise. The impact spun Lix half around, and by the time he recovered, Vorax had already inserted himself into the scene, standing so close to the table that his knees pressed against its edge.
Yes,
Vorax agreed, his higher-pitched voice somehow making the words more mocking.
and such small aliens too. Far too small to claim such a prime location.
He gestured expansively, nearly knocking over one of the human's drinks in the process.
Do you tiny things even understand what makes this spot so valuable? Perfect proximity to the service counter. Close enough for easy ordering, yet positioned just outside the splash zone when some inebriated Colovan inevitably loses control of their beverage sacks.
The disrespect in Vorax's tone would have started a blood feud between Visarians, but the humans merely watched with expressions Lix couldn't quite read. Their faces remained frustratingly neutral, lacking the clear threat displays or submission signals that most species exhibited. It was time for a more direct approach. Lix himself stepped forward this time, shouldering past both his companions with enough force to make his dominance clear. He raised his right fist, each knuckle scarred from countless victories, and brought it down on the table in one powerful movement. The impact sent empty glasses jumping, utensils clattering, and the satisfying crack of stressed polymer echoed through the suddenly quiet tavern.
This furniture,
Lix growled, letting his vocal cords vibrate for maximum bass,
is clearly designed for beings of proper stature. Look at how you swim in those chairs, how you can barely reach across this table meant for real species. You have no right to occupy space you cannot even properly fill. Surrender this position to those who can actually appreciate it.
The human Zix had been looming over, the one suffering the indignity of silver hair in his space, moved calmly. One hand reached up and gently pushed Zix's hair aside, the gesture neither aggressive nor submissive, just practical. The human's face arranged itself into what Lix had learned was called a smile, though he'd never understood why baring teeth was considered friendly rather than threatening among their kind. "Hey there, big guys," the human said, his voice oddly warm. "I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here. Did we do something to offend you? Different species, different customs. We're still learning our way around. I'm Alex, by the way." He gestured to his companions. "This is Ryan, and that's Chad over there." The one identified as Ryan raised what appeared to be a drinking vessel in a gesture Lix didn't recognize. He was the largest of the three, though still pitifully small by Visarian standards. "Pleasure to meet you folks. First round's on us if we accidentally violated some local tradition. We got here about an hour ago, spotted this empty table, and figured..." The soft thunk of metal on polymer interrupted Ryan's conciliatory rambling. The third human, Chad, had placed something on the table. Lix's secondary eyelids flicked closed for a moment, an involuntary threat assessment reflex. The object was definitely a weapon, though not one he recognized. It looked primitive, all harsh angles and dull metal, with no visible energy signatures or plasma cores. Chad's hand remained on it as he lifted his drink with the other, maintaining eye contact with each Visarian in turn as he drained the container in one long pull. "Sorry about Chad," Alex said quickly, shooting his companion a look that might have been warning or worry. "He's had a few, and he's not great with new people. Total introvert, you know? Gets nervous in social situations, and let's just say he might have a slight trigger-happy tendency." Ryan nodded emphatically. "Chad's more of a shoot-first, ask-questions-never kind of guy when he's been drinking, and even worse when he's sober. We're trying to work on his people skills, but..." He shrugged, the gesture surprisingly eloquent despite the species' limited range of motion. Lix exchanged glances with his companions. The disrespect was staggering. These humans were more concerned about their friends' social anxiety than 3 Vizarians actively threatening them. They acted as if Chad, silent, still, and a third their size, posed more danger than 3 members of the 4th strongest species in the galaxy. The insult cut deeper than any challenge could have. Time for escalation. Lix extended one finger with theatrical slowness, letting the humans track the movement. He placed the digit against the nearest mug, Ryan's, judging by position, and began to push. The container slid across the table's surface with a soft scraping sound that seemed to fill the quiet tavern. Other patrons had formed a loose circle, maintaining safe distances while ensuring good views of the impending entertainment. The mug reached the edge, teetered, fell. The crash was satisfying, made better by the spreading puddle of amber liquid that splashed across the floor and onto Ryan's lower garments. The human looked down at the mess, then back up at Lix, and for the first time, his expression shifted into something harder. "That," Ryan said slowly, "was a 15-credit bottle of Altarian amber, imported. Hard to find this far from the core worlds." His tone had changed, taking on an edge that Lix found amusing coming from such a small creature. "I'm going to need compensation for that." The 3 Vizarians laughed in perfect harmony, the sound booming through the tavern like war drums. Zix clutched his stomach in exaggerated mirth.
Compensation for that little accident?
Purely unintentional,
Vorax added, wiping away tears of amusement.
These things happen when species of such vastly different sizes try to share space.
If you don't like it,
Lix concluded, spreading his arms wide in clear invitation,
feel free to do something about it.
The humans exchanged glances. It was a quick thing, lasting no more than a heartbeat, but something passed between them. Some form of communication that required no words, no gestures, just a meeting of eyes and minute shifts in expression. Lix felt his secondary heart kick in again, pumping combat hormones through his system. Finally, these presumptuous little creatures would give them what they wanted. They would throw the first punch, attempt the first strike, and then the Vizarians could defend themselves without running afoul of the tavern's loose rules about instigation. The bad feeling hit him the moment all 3 humans rose from their seats. It wasn't fear. Lix had trained too long to mistake anticipation for terror. It was something else, something his combat instructors had called instinct dissonance. That moment when your conscious mind said everything was perfect, but some primitive part of your brain screamed that you'd miscalculated catastrophically. The humans stood with a fluidity that didn't match their supposedly inferior ranking. They moved like fighters, like predators, like things that had evolved to fight and kill. But that was impossible. The rankings were clear. The science was settled. 9th place was 9th place. Zix, bold and stupid as always, lowered his massive head toward Alex.
Come on there, little thing. Free shot. Let's see what the 9th strongest species can.
The sound was wet and meaty, like a mallet hitting overripe fruit. Alex jumped, and his fist moved almost too fast to track, disappearing into the soft tissue beneath Zix's jaw with devastating accuracy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Zix's eyes went wide, his mouth opened in shock, and something white and red fell from between his lips. The tooth hit the ground with a clink that seemed impossibly loud. It was half the size of Alex's entire fist, a Vizarian bone, and it lay there in a spreading pool of purple blood like an accusation. Zix stared at it, one hand coming up to his mouth in disbelief. The noise he made then wasn't words, wasn't even really a scream. It was pure rage given voice, the bellow of a wounded predator that had just discovered it wasn't Apex after all. The tavern erupted. Zix lunged at Alex with claws extended, All pretense of civilized combat abandoned, but the human moved like water, flowing around the attack and delivering another precisely placed strike to Zix's knee. The joint bent sideways with a crack that made several onlookers wince. Lix had no time to process his friend's impossible defeat. Ryan was already moving, had been moving from the moment the first punch landed. The human's approach was different from his companion's, less fluid, more direct. He came in low and fast, and Lix dropped into a combat stance that had won him dozens of inter-house challenges. The first exchange told him everything had gone wrong. Ryan's punch connected with Lix's reinforced abdominal plates, and it was like being hit by a shuttlecraft. The human's fists didn't have the surface area of a Visarian's, but the force concentrated into that small point made Lix's organs shift. He returned with a haymaker that should have caved in the human's skull, but Ryan rolled with it, letting the blow glance off while delivering a response that made Lix's teeth rattle. Impossible. The human was dense, constructed of something far more substantial than flesh and bone had any right to be. Each impact felt like striking stone wrapped in skin, and worse, the human didn't seem to feel pain the way he should. Hits that would have dropped most species only made Ryan adjust his stance, eyes calculating the next angle of attack. The kick to X's leg changed everything. Visarian anatomy included reinforced joint structures specifically evolved for their low-gravity homeworld. Their knees could support their size and weight while running, could absorb impacts that would shatter lesser species. But Ryan's kick hit at precisely the angle that all that evolutionary engineering couldn't protect against. The joint hyperextended, ligaments screaming, and Lix found himself falling. The ground rushed up to meet him, and his impact with the floor gave him a perfect view of how badly everything had deteriorated. His friend Zix was on his knees, both hands pressed to his mouth as purple blood flowed between his fingers. Alex stood over him with an expression of almost bored professionalism, like a craftsman examining substandard work. As Lix watched, Alex delivered another strike, this one to the cluster of nerves at the base of a Visarian skull. Zix's eyes rolled back, showing the whites, and he toppled forward like a felled tree. Desperate, Lix turned toward the third confrontation, hoping against hope that Vorax had found success where they had failed. What he saw broke something fundamental in his understanding of the universe. Chad was back in his seat, calmly pouring another drink from a bottle that had materialized from somewhere. Vorax lay crumpled on the floor nearby, unconscious or worse, with no sign of struggle, no indication of a fight. It was as if the human had simply decided Vorax should be horizontal, and reality had obliged. The human who hadn't spoken a single word, who'd been described as an antisocial drunk, had ended his portion of the conflict so quickly and quietly that Lix hadn't even noticed it happening. Chad raised his freshly filled mug in a small salute when he noticed Lix looking, then returned to his drinking as if nothing of consequence had occurred. "You still with us, big guy?" The voice came from above. Ryan stood over him, not even breathing hard, knuckles unmarked despite the devastating blows he'd delivered. There was something almost apologetic in his expression, and that was somehow worse than mockery would have been. Lix tried to rise, but his leg wouldn't support him. His secondary heart was pumping overtime, flooding his system with hormones that screamed at him to flee, to fight, to do something other than lie here like prey. But his body wouldn't respond properly, too damaged by strikes that shouldn't have been possible from a 9th-ranked species. "Look," Alex said, stepping over Zix's unconscious form to join Ryan. "We should probably get you guys to a medic. That knee doesn't look great, and your friend here is going to need dental work pretty quickly if he wants to keep the rest of his teeth." The words didn't compute. Lix stared up at the two humans, waiting for the punchline, for the mockery, for the traditional victor's humiliation that should follow any combat. Instead, Ryan was already pulling out a communication device, his fingers already moving across the interface. "There's a good clinic 2 levels up," Ryan said, glancing down at Lix. "They've got species-specific treatment pods. We've had to use them a couple of times ourselves. Good people, discreet. Don't ask too many questions about tavern disagreements." Inside Lix's mind, a war raged between everything he thought he knew and what was actually happening. These creatures, these supposedly inferior beings who had just dismantled 3 Visarians like cleaning equipment, were offering medical assistance? It violated every rule of dominance he'd been taught since hatching. The victor took everything, humiliated the fallen, established their superiority through cruelty as much as strength. That was the way of things. But his instincts, those same primitive signals that had warned him too late about the danger, were now screaming something different. They were telling him to accept, to take the offered hand, to survive this encounter with whatever dignity remained. His conscious mind rebelled against the idea, but his body was already responding to the deeper wisdom of self-preservation.
Why?
The word came out as a croak, his throat dry from combat hormones and shock. Alex shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass infinite casual indifference to the violence that had just occurred. "Because we're not assholes? Look, you guys wanted a fight, we gave you a fight. Nobody's dead, lessons learned. Now let's get you patched up before that leg does permanent damage." The logic was so alien, so fundamentally different from Visarian thinking, that Lix found himself nodding before he could stop himself. The movement sent spikes of pain through his neck, reminding him that Ryan's fists had connected there too during their brief exchange.
I accept.
He managed, the words tasting like defeat and survival in equal measure. "Great!" Ryan's enthusiasm seemed genuine as he bent down, carefully positioning himself to support Lix's weight without putting pressure on the damaged knee. "Alex, you want to call for a med team while I get him sitting up? And maybe check if Chad's planning to help or just finish the entire bottle." Alex was already speaking into his device, his free hand gesturing toward the bar where several patrons had pressed themselves against the far wall. The conversation was too quiet for Lix to hear, but whatever Alex said had the bartender nodding frantically and pointing toward a service corridor. The tavern had transformed into a theater of whispers and stares. Every species present, from the transparent Shilani to the strange void dancers contained in their mobility water suits, watched with undisguised fascination as Ryan helped Lix into a sitting position against an overturned table. The role reversal was complete, the predators tending their prey, the victors showing mercy to the defeated.
"Heard humans were trouble."
A Colovan merchant gurgled to his companion, not bothering to lower his voice.
"But they are helping the ones who attacked them." "Size matters,"
another patron, a spindly Xerxian, chittered in response.
"But apparently not the way we thought. Look at them. Not even 7 feet tall, and they dropped Visarians like training dummies."
Meanwhile, on the ground, Zix groaned, a sound that started low and built into a wet, pained rasp. Purple blood had pooled beneath his head, and when he tried to speak, only bubbles emerged. Vorax hadn't moved at all, though Lix could see his chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of the deeply unconscious. "Medical team's on the way," Alex announced, closing his communication device. "Should be here in about 3 minutes. They're bringing stabilizers for your friend's jaw and a neural scanner for the quiet one."
His name is Vorax,
Lix heard himself say, though he wasn't sure why it mattered.
The one with the broken mouth is Zix.
Vorax and Zix, Ryan repeated, testing the names. "And you're Lix, right? I heard one of them say it earlier." The fact that the human had bothered to remember his name in the middle of combat sent another wave of cognitive dissonance through Lix's mind. These creatures were impossibly strong, casually violent, and yet polite? Considerate? It made no sense within any framework he understood. The service corridor doors burst open, admitting 2 medical technicians, a pair of 4-armed Altarians pushing hover stretchers equipped with various species-specific equipment. They took in the scene and immediately moved toward the unconscious Visarians.
"Blunt force trauma to the face,"
one technician noted, scanning Zix with a handheld device. "Multiple dental avulsions, possibly a fracture of the lower jaw. We need to move quickly to save the remaining teeth." The other technician was already loading Vorax onto a stretcher, checking his vital signs with mechanical precision. "Neural disruption, non-fatal. Looks like someone hit the soft spot of his head with a lot of strength. Professional work." Their eyes turned toward Chad, who raised his mug in a small salute without looking their way. "Can you stand?" Ryan asked Lix, his voice cutting through the medical chatter. "We can get you on a stretcher too, but if you can walk with support, it might be better for that knee to move a little." Lix tested his weight, finding that with Ryan on one side, he could manage a limping shuffle. Alex appeared on his other side, and together they helped him to his feet. The height difference was even more pronounced now. Even injured and hunched, Lynx towered over both humans, yet they supported his weight as if it were nothing. "Chad!" Alex called over his shoulder. "We're heading to the med station. You coming?" The silent human didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge the question. He simply continued drinking, his eyes focused on something only he could see. "Chad, seriously," Ryan added, his tone mixing exasperation with fondness. "We're not leaving you here to start another fight." Still nothing. Chad might have been carved from stone for all the reaction he showed. Alex sighed, then carefully shifted Lix's weight more onto Ryan. "Hold him for a second," he said, then walked back to their table. What followed was a wordless negotiation, conducted entirely through gestures and meaningful looks. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Chad drained his mug in one long pull, stood with liquid grace, picked up his weapon, and nodded once. "Thank the void," Ryan muttered. "Last time we left him alone after a fight, he ended up in another fight, and we only found him the next morning in a bed with a pink alien twice his size. The only thing he told us about that night was that the pink thing was a female." The journey to the medical station was surreal. Lix, supported between two humans who barely reached his shoulder, limped through the tavern while patrons parted like water. Behind them, the medical technicians guided the hover stretchers carrying his unconscious friends, and further back, maintaining a precise 10-foot distance, Chad followed in absolute silence. The station's artificial night cycle had dimmed the corridor lights, casting long shadows that made their procession look like something from a fever dream. Other late-night travelers pressed against the walls as they passed, whispers following in their wake.
"Is that blood? Purple blood?"
Bizarrians. Someone finally put them in their place. Look at the size difference. How is that even possible? Humans. Heard they come from some death world where the gravity would crush most species.
That last comment lodged in Lix's mind like a splinter. High gravity. Of course. It explained everything and nothing all at once. The medical station's doors sensed their approach, sliding open as they got closer. The night receptionist, an elderly proximan whose feathers had long since gone gray, took one look at their group and immediately triggered the emergency intake protocol.
"Treatment pods 3 through 5 are prepared for Visarian bodies,"
she announced.
"Get the critical patients in immediately. Dental regeneration in pod 3. Neural stabilization in pod 4.
The medical technicians rushed past with the stretchers, leaving Lix standing, barely, with his human supports in the reception area. Ryan and Alex guided him to a bench, clearly designed for species larger than humans, helping him sit before the damaged knee could give out entirely. "Right," Ryan said, pulling out a credit transfer device. "Let's settle up for the medical bills before—"
No!
The word surprised Lix as much as anyone.
I pay. We started the fight. We pay the consequences.
Ryan and Alex exchanged another of those wordless looks that seemed to carry entire conversations. "You sure?" Alex asked.
I'm sure.
Lix fumbled for his own credit device, finding it still miraculously intact despite the violence.
It's correct.
The receptionist processed the payment without comment, though her crest feathers rippled in what might have been amusement.
The preliminary scans show your friends will need at least 3 hours in the pods. You're welcome to wait here. Or we can treat that knee.
I wait.
Lick said firmly. Something about leaving his unconscious friends felt wrong, even if they had brought this entirely on themselves. Ryan dropped onto the bench beside him, the furniture's scale making the human look almost childlike. Alex took the other side, and Chad found a corner where he could observe all entrances and exits, placing his weapon within easy reach before settling into perfect stillness. "So," Ryan said after a moment, his tone conversational, "want to know what you got wrong?" Despite everything, Lix found himself curious.
The strength rankings, they're accurate. I've seen the data myself.
"Oh, they're accurate," Alex agreed, "for what they measure. See, the Galactic Council tests everyone under standard conditions. Same gravity, same atmosphere, same equipment. Very fair, very scientific."
But you're not from a standard world,
Lick said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Ryan laughed, the sound surprisingly warm. "Earth's got about 3 times standard gravity. We evolved there. Our bones are denser than most species' armor plating. Our muscles had to develop just to let us walk upright, let alone run or fight." "The rankings measure absolute force output," Alex continued, "but they don't account for the fact that we're basically compressed. All that 9th place strength packed into a frame half your size, the physics gets interesting."
Interesting,
Lix repeated, thinking of how Ryan's fist had felt like a meteor impact.
That's one word for it.
"Could be worse," Ryan offered. "You could have picked a fight with someone from New Australia. Those colonists adapted to even higher gravity. Makes us look delicate." The idea of humans being considered delicate by anything was so absurd that Lix found himself making a sound that might have been laughter if his ribs didn't hurt so much. "For what it's worth," Alex said, "you guys weren't bad, just wrong assumptions. Happens to everyone their first time fighting humans."
First time, Lix echoed, and last time.
"Smart male," Ryan approved. "Though honestly, most humans aren't looking for fights, just like us."
About that,
Lix started, but Alex waved him off. "Water under the bridge, or beer under the table in this case. Though next time, maybe just ask if you can share the booth. It's big enough for everyone." The casual forgiveness was perhaps the most alien thing about these creatures. Vizarians held grudges for generations, carefully nurturing them like toxic flowers. Humans apparently shrugged off attempted assault like weather.
Your strength,
Lix said slowly, working through the implications.
Pound for pound, you might be the strongest species in the galaxy.
Probably, Ryan agreed without pride or shame. But you know what we'd trade for it? Another foot or 2 of height. Do you have any idea how annoying it is when every other species builds things for giants? Can't reach the top shelves in most stores, Alex added mournfully. Have to jump to hit some door controls. And don't get me started on trying to find clothes that fit on station. The juxtaposition of beings who could shatter Vizarian bones, lamenting about shopping inconveniences, broke something in Lix's worldview. These weren't mighty warriors glorying in their power. They were just humans. Dangerously strong people who happened to come from a world that had molded them into living weapons, but who mostly seemed interested in drinking and avoiding trouble.
We thought,
Lix said carefully,
that strength and size meant everything.
Used to think the same thing, Ryan admitted. Size matters, but not the way you think. From his corner, Chad smiled in a way that might have been agreement or might have been completely unrelated to the conversation. It was impossible for Lix to tell.
Your friend,
Lix ventured, looking toward the silent human.
He ended Vorax before we even knew he'd moved.
Chad's special forces, Alex explained, lowering his voice. Retired, supposedly, but you know how that goes. He doesn't talk much about it. Doesn't talk much, period. But he's good people, Ryan added firmly, just as his own way of handling things. The medical station's gentle noise filled the silence that followed. Through the transparent walls of the treatment area, Lix could see the pods where his friends floated in healing suspension. Zix's jaw was already being rebuilt at the molecular level, new teeth growing to replace the ones Alex's fist had knocked free. Vorax's neural activity showed as gentle pulses of light, his scrambling synapses being carefully reorganized. The hours passed in surprisingly comfortable companionship. Alex told stories about other misunderstandings between humans and various species, each one reinforcing the danger of assumptions. Chad said nothing, but his presence was oddly comforting, like having a sleeping predator in the room, dangerous but predictable. When the pods finally chimed completion and his friends emerged, groggy but whole, Lix stood to greet them. The humans stood too, and for a moment the 6 beings faced each other in the medical station's sterile light.
Next time,
Lix said firmly, looking at his confused friends,
we ask to share the table.
Next time, Alex agreed with that strange human smile. As they parted ways, the Vizarians heading for their quarters to process their humiliation and education, the humans returning to their probably reclaimed table, Lix made himself a promise. He would never again judge a species by their ranking or their size. The galaxy was far more complex than any strength rank could capture, and the true measure of strength had variables no one had thought to calculate. Behind him, he heard Zix testing his regenerated teeth, and Vorax muttering about impossible human reflexes. They'd learned the same lesson, written in bruises and broken pride. The 9th strongest species in the galaxy, by standard measurements. But standards, Lix now understood, didn't account for everything. They didn't account for density or gravity, for training or mindset, for the kind of species that could evolve on a death world and come out the other side looking for nothing more than a quiet drink with friends. He would never underestimate anyone again, especially not the humans.